Okay, we're going to begin today with a look at Egyptian art under the pharaohs. Where is Egypt? It's right here, right next to the Red Sea, just south of the Mediterranean. Yes, I got a new laser pointer that works when I press the button now. That's all for you, all for you. So, Egypt at first, just like all other settlements in the area, was not a unified country, but that will come around later. There was a bunch of warring city-states that eventually sort of coagulated into two basic areas. There is Lower Egypt and there is Upper Egypt. Eventually there will be a king who we will look at briefly named King Narmer, who unifies everything and establishes the Egyptian dynasty that we know and love today. So a few things that the Egyptians gave us. They gave us a way to measure time based on dynasties. They gave us a lot of information from their tombs. So that's something we want to keep in mind as we look at all of these objects, that they come from tombs, and so that's the mindset. A lot of everyday things, everyday utilitarian objects. None of that was meant to last, so it didn't. And it also gives us a good bit of insight into their afterlife. So here we go. They were a polytheistic society. They had a lot of gods. Each of the gods had a specialty area. Gods of fertility, gods of the harvest, royal, protector gods and goddesses, and so forth. The pharaohs especially were focused on not just their earthly legacy, but the afterlife. And so when we look in their tombs, we get a lot of artifacts that support that. Lots of stories about them. A lot of recordings about how awesome they were and great and who they conquered and that kind of thing. This measurement of time by dynasties, that is simply the familial rule of a particular line. So King Narmer will be succeeded by his son, who will be succeeded by his son, and so on until somebody gets murdered or there are no male heirs. Let's see, a lot of focus on the afterlife. It seems that most of their waking hours were spent preparing for the afterlife in some way or another. At least that's the impression that we would get from their tombs. And the perception of this afterlife is very similar to the Mesopotamian one. It's just like this one. But the Egyptians took it a step further, and instead of just taking a few important things with them to be buried in their tombs, they took everything they could possibly cram in there, they did. Here is how the Egyptian period is broken up into dynasties. You don't have to remember all of these dates for these dynasties, but it'll give you a rough idea. Overall, they lasted about 4,000 years at their height. They begin in about 3400 BC and end in the Roman period, so about 500 AD. So there's a pretty good range of things that happen. Stylistically, we don't really get a shift in style from the Old Kingdom, the Intermediate period, Middle Kingdom, Second Intermediate, until we get to the New Kingdom. All of the art produced for these 3,000 years is pretty similar. But then we get a shift when we get to the Amarna period, as we will see later on down the road. We'll begin with a look at the pre-dynastic period, which is the geographical history of Egypt without reliance on the establishment of dynasties. This is before pharaonic rule. So the things that we get recovered are from different city-states, and they're all scattered about. So this is a watercolor reproduction of a tomb mural that has survived down to us, and it deals with elements of the afterlife. It's a funerary image, and we know that from the presence of these big boats, these big boomerang shapes here. Those are boats that escort the deceased through into the afterlife. And you'll remember your Greek history that the Greeks believed the same thing, that when you died you had to cross the river Styx into the afterlife, and that's what would be waiting for you. What do we see? There are some funerals happening on some of these boats. There's some hunting of animals, things that we do in this life, we do in the afterlife. There's the capture of prisoners and subsequent abuse of those prisoners. And then there's some feasting and enjoyment of music and that sort of thing. Just a sort of a whole hodgepodge of different things that would happen in the afterlife. We do get the presence of this guy who looks familiar to us. It's another heraldic figure, which is a central figure flanked on either side by two mirror images. Here it appears in Egypt instead of Mesopotamia, which suggests that there's already contact between the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians. And here's our reminder of our heraldic figure from the lyre soundbox. As far as geography goes, here's Mesopotamia, here's Egypt. They're very close. And we've got these rivers, we've got the Mediterranean Sea, so that we can trade from ships and so forth. So it makes sense that a lot of the influence of what we see developmentally with regard to Egypt comes to us from Mesopotamia. What else do we notice here? Well, we notice that the figures are not very developed. In fact, there's not a lot of difference between these figures, which are essentially stick figures, and those Neolithic cave figures that we found from ancient France. So there's just not a whole heck of a lot of development. That seems to come about after there is exposure to Mesopotamian culture and the Egyptians adopt a lot of their stylistic attributes. Here's what the original mural looks like. These dark parts, that's the original. Everything else is filled in and reconstructed, which is why I show you the watercolor copy, because you can't make out anything from this. But it just gives you an idea of what it originally looked like. Here is a pre-dynastic jar that has survived down to us, and again we have the suggestion of some sort of heraldic figure here on the side. Funerary actions would be taking place, pyres, burning of the dead, that kind of thing, and then later on we'll see mummification and the transport of mummies into the afterlife to be reunited with their ka and so forth. Stylistically, very similar to what we've seen elsewhere, just basic silhouettes, stick figures, not a lot of attention to detail. These arms up, that's a sign of the ka, the presence of the ka, and I'll show you that later on. But it's also a symbol of mourning. Whenever someone dies, the mourners always have their hands up as if they're wailing in sorrow and that type of thing, which is what we expect to see on funerary items. Here are a few more funerary items. A vase, another ka statue here, cosmetics palettes. If you're going to wear makeup in this life, you're probably going to need it in the afterlife too. A knife, other jars of unguents and lotions and things, all making it to the... There is a sense of scale happening, starting to develop, hierarchical scale. The pharaoh is always going, or the king is going to be always bigger than everyone else. And then we have some additional bits of information sort of scattered about over the mace head that will give us some information as well. It all comes together in this object. This is one of the first dynastic objects that survives down to us. It is the makeup palette of King Narmer, who was also known as King Menes. This is the back of it. This is the top of it. This little well here is where they would put the eye makeup. A lot of glare in the sun, the unforgiving sun of Egypt, and so they wore dark makeup around their eyes to kind of cut down on the glare, just like football players do. What do we see? What is he telling us through his palette? Well, he's telling us a couple of things. On the left side, both of these, by the way, are depictions of King Narmer, but on the back, he wears the crown, the bowling pin shaped crown of Upper Egypt, and then on the right side, he wears this curling lotus bloom crown of Lower Egypt. Why is he wearing crowns of Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt? Because he's the king that first unifies all of these city-states under one rule. He does this through military invasion and conquering things, and then also establishing a common religion for everyone. He links everyone through the religion which is dedicated to Horus, the falcon-headed royal protector god. We see on the left that he is defeating his enemies. He's got the Upper Egyptian crown, but he's defeating the Lower Egyptians, represented by this poor Slav about to get his brains bashed in, and then also this similar Lower Egyptian head that's kind of sprouting out of these lotus blooms, and then there's Horus with a rope latched into a ring into his nose to make sure he knows his place. Along the top here, we have some identifying characteristics. We've got the bull-headed goddess Hathor, who has the face of a human, but then the horns of a bull. And then in the center, we have a serach, which is a pictograph or a name container that gives us the name of Narmer. Nar, which is a catfish, and then a Mer, which is a chisel. You put the Nar and the Mer together, and you get Narmer. King catfish chisel. Or king stinging catfish is another way that gets interpreted, because the chisel can also represent pain. Painful catfish. King painful catfish is who we have here. You can see these little pictographs when we get them all together like this and they start to tell a story, then we call them hieroglyphs. That's Egyptian picture writing. It's the oldest form of Egyptian writing. Not only do we have the pharaoh's name in a serach, sometimes we'll see it in a cartouche, which is an elongated sort of ovular shape that has a little foot on it, so it'll stand up straight and tall for all of eternity. And then it usually contains multiple names. The pharaohs don't just have one name. They've got their birth name, they've got their throne name, they've got their Horus name, they've got their titles and so forth. They may have as many as 10, 15 names all crammed into one cartouche. Here's a close-up of the backside of the palette, and you can see a number of hieroglyphs as well as the establishment of the pharaonic formula, how to depict the pharaoh. And this is what we don't deviate from for thousands of years. If it's pharaoh, this is how you show him. But what if he's old and feeble? This is how you show him. But what if he's young and boy-like? This is how you show him. What if he's not a warrior at all? You show him as a warrior, because these are all rules that you don't deviate from regardless. And we'll see later on, even if the pharaoh is a woman, you still show them as if they were male, because that's the rule. That's the formula. We have a sandal bearer behind the king back here, holding the king's sandals. Why are they holding the king's sandals? Because the king's standing on holy ground. Well, why is it holy ground? Because the king's standing on it. The pharaoh, the king, is a deity. He's a god. He's not just a king. He's a god. He's a lesser god, but he's still a god. And so everywhere he walks is holy ground. He's dressed in this really elaborate little tunic. He's got the crown. He's got a little sash as well. Unlike his foes here that he's about to teach a lesson to, they've just got loincloths showing them exposed like that. is a way to kind of defeat them and debase them. Onward, on the other side, we see King Narmer. Now, he's not really 25 feet tall, but he's symbolically that height because of hierarchical scale. He's the most important, so he's the tallest. Who are these people with him? Probably his son, maybe his assistant, vizier, or something like that. And then we have slaves and soldiers. Those are the least important, so they are the smallest. What's he doing? He's taking a nice stroll to survey the heads and bodies of his decapitated enemies here. We know that they're being prepared to be taken into the afterlife by the presence of that funerary boat that we saw earlier. There's a nice close view. I knew you'd want to see them with their heads stashed between their ankles there, and then their headless bodies laid out for the king in a twisted display of his strength. We don't deviate from this formula, and then also other nobles who come about later on. This is a portrait of Hesse-Ra, who was sort of a vizier or an advisor to the king, and he was literate. He's not a pharaoh, but he uses the same sort of formula. He was important, and so he wants to kind of visually be compared to the pharaoh by being shown the same way. Now, the pose is usually pretty pharaonic. It's a complicated pose. I do this every year. I haven't fallen down yet. So the lower part of the body is in profile, and the left leg advances. And then the upper abdomen faces you this way, but then the head turns this way, but then the eye faces you. So this is how they always are shown, regardless. Always projecting a sense of advancement and strength and moving forward and moving up. In this case, our subject is not a pharaoh, so he's not necessarily a warrior, but he is a scribe, and so he holds all of the implements of the scribe, the stylus, where he would take notes on wax tablets and then transfer that later to papyrus, which is an early form of paper. Pretty valuable because instead of having to carve everything into big limestone slabs, now we can make it on paper, and we can roll it up, and we can store it and take it with us, and it doesn't take up near as much room. So all of that is here. These are all the armrest and the brush and the stylus, all the things that a scribe would need. And then above him, where we would normally have all the names of the pharaoh, we have different titles for this guy. And here they are. He was the confidant of the king. He was the great one of Upper Egypt. The great one of Pet. The great one of the dentists, which means he's the first person in recorded history to have dentistry as his vocation. Chief of the scribes, elder, brother of Sin Men, and a magician as well. All of that communicated here in these hieroglyphs. Now, how do we know what they say? How do we interpret all these hieroglyphs? Well, for that, we can thank Napoleon Bonaparte, of all people. So when Napoleon was rampaging across Egypt and made his way into Cairo, it turns out that Napoleon was sort of a fan of Egyptian art and architecture. And as he traveled there, he had a lot of the artists and engravers and architects who were with him document everything that he saw, all of the pyramids and temples and mastabas and statuary. He documents all of that and essentially becomes the father of Egyptology. Before Napoleon Bonaparte, people really didn't care about Egypt and the history of Egypt. So as they are, and because I don't know all the deep details, I'm just going to say they were farting around in the desert one day, and one of the soldiers stumbles across this stone in the remains of an old temple, and the stone shows it tells about the great things that King Ptolemy had done and for all of the people of Egypt. And it's in 3 different languages. It's in hieroglyphs at the top, and then Coptic in the center, and then Greek at the bottom. So everyone knew Greek at the time, and so it wasn't difficult to backtrack and then translate it from Greek back into Coptic, back into ancient Egyptian. And look, there he is. There's Napoleon checking out mummies. Boy, did they have mummies when Napoleon came through. 19th century was a profusion of mummies because everyone who could afford it was mummified in one way or another, either within a large tomb or a crypt or a small crypt, or even for the po folks buried in a jug in the ground. But you were preserved in some way or another. So many mummies they had that because you're in the desert and you need fuel for the trains and that sort of thing, they would just burn mummies. It was a lot easier to just chuck some mummies in there and use them for fuel, or burn them to keep warm at night and that sort of thing. They also, around this time, made a particular shade of oil paint called mummy brown, which was made from the ground up remains of mummy. Part of the mummification process is to use pitch, pine tar, which has this sort of brownish color, and they would grind that up and mix it with linseed oil and make brown oil paint. Still on the hunt for some, so if you ever come across mummy brown, original mummy brown. I've got a synthetic mummy brown that's supposed to be the same color, but it's not the same because it's not made out of mummies, so it doesn't have that magic. I want the magic in it. So anyway, fun stuff. And they were also grinding up mummies and using them for medicine, and you would drink them and all sorts of weird things. The Victorians were a nutty bunch of folks. It's in the British Museum now. There it is. It's just a big piece of basalt. It's about this tall. It's not huge or anything. But you can go and visit it today. And it will have a translation of all this text should you decide to read it. And then there's the breakdown in the different languages, hieroglyphs, demonic, also Coptic, and Greek. And then there it is handwritten so that you can see the letters and words a little bit easier. This is just a brief translation of part of it, where it's talking about how awesome Ptolemy is and what he did and that kind of thing. Hieroglyphs translate into words. They're called logograms. Each hieroglyph translates into a word, and if you put one with another, then that makes a different word, and so forth. But you can kind of get a sense of how those hieroglyphs come together and give us information. Now let's look at where you'd find all these things. Funerary architectural forms. Well, the Egyptians originally used the mastaba to bury their dead, and it was built very similarly to the way they built the ziggurat. It was a dirt core and then bricks faced on the outside. The burial chamber was not inside, but rather it was underneath in a little shaft. That was so that we could protect the deceased a little easier. And then they would have a little chapel so you could go and visit, and then within the chapel would be a statue of the Ka, because the deceased is supposed to be reunited with the ka, or their spirit, after they die, and then that's how they travel on into the afterlife. So if we add a statue as sort of a backup, ideally you would have your own corpse, which would be reunited with the ka in the afterlife. But if your tomb gets robbed, usually the corpse gets destroyed, and it's no good for the afterlife. So they include a spare tire or a ka statue to accompany you into the afterlife as well. The ones that have survived are not that impressive. This is a mastaba, the great mastaba at Madun. It's an old kingdom mastaba, and it looks like a big pile of dirt, because that's pretty much what it is. Remember, we're in the desert. We get sandstorms. These things wear down and erode. There's a little bit of the brick fascia around the bottom that has survived, but mostly it's just a big dirt core. And then this is the guardian, so that you don't go visit this without paying the admission fee. There's a view. You can see the flooded plains of the Nile back there. Egypt, around the banks of the Nile, very surprisingly fertile. It's not the big desert that we usually think of, but that's just an alternate view. Lesser people had smaller mastabas. Richer people, kings, pharaohs, they had the big ones. And just to kind of compare, a royal mastaba would be along this sort of scale, and then non-royals were usually one-seaters. You could only fit the one person, but the royals needed more room because they had more stuff that they needed to take with them. Here's one that's been reconstructed that gives you kind of an idea of what it might have looked like back in the day, down to even allowing a little window so you get a little ventilation inside when you're going to visit the ka of your auntie or whoever is buried in your mastaba. Now, though they look the same, don't get them confused on the test. Remember that a mastaba is a tomb and a ziggurat is a temple. Yes, they look the same and they're built the same, but their function is completely different. There's no dead bodies in the ziggurat, but there are in the mastaba, or underneath it rather. So the difference is in the function, even though the appearance is very similar. There's another cutaway showing the shaft getting down to the burial chamber. They did their best to block these in so that the corpses would not be molested and would be able to make it intact into the afterlife. But the vast majority of these places were sacked in olden times and robbed. Very few made it intact. In fact, one of the only ones that made it completely or mostly completely intact was the tomb of King Tutankhamun, which we'll look at next time. But this shows you a sort of a breakaway, what you can expect to see when you go to visit the deceased. There's a little chapel, and you could leave an offering to appease them or their guardian gods, or tribute to their ka. And then the actual body down this shaft into an underground burial chamber. This would then be filled in with stones and dirt and so forth, so that you couldn't get at it in order to protect the deceased. There's a ka statue that has survived and has the upraised arms to get your attention. Hey, I'm over here. Hey, dead person, I'm your ka. This is to help you find me. So my arms are raised, just like a tour guide in Paris, always walking around with their arms raised so you can find them. Same thing here. Now this guy's a little bit different. Don't think that all early Egyptian statuary looks like this, because it doesn't. He's got a facial expression. He's got a little smile on his face. Most of them do not have this. They're totally aloof and expressionless. I don't know why this guy's smiling. He must have been a good guy, and so the afterlife is treating him right. But most of them do not have this level of energy attached to them. They're mostly expressionless. Here is another expression of the ka from a Book of the Dead, where the deceased is being escorted to meet Osiris, who is the lord of the underworld. And they have their arms up so that they can be acknowledged and so forth. This guy and his wife going to meet Osiris, and then we have various identifying hieroglyphs there to show us who's who and what's what and all of that kind of stuff, including a nice pile of offerings here for Osiris. Got some food, some bread, all to make sure that Osiris gets his snack on. So as we evolve, eventually the pharaohs decide that they need something a little bit more elaborate, and so we get the first pyramid called the stepped pyramid, which is essentially 7 mastabas stacked on top of each other. That's how they came up with the pyramid idea. And then there's been some erosion over the years to give you this little transitional level. But that's what it is. It's mastabas stacked on top of one another. The burial chamber is underneath in this one. In subsequent pyramids, the burial chamber will be up inside it, so that when you look at the pyramid, you're also looking at the space occupied by the corpse of the pharaoh. This one was designed by Imhotep, who was the advisor to King Zoser, also called King Djoser, also called King Dozer. I don't know which one's right, even after doing this for this. It depends on who you ask and who you read. King Zoser, Djoser, Dozer employed Imhotep to be his advisor, and Imhotep did so. He designed this. He was an architect. He was also a master of medicine. He was the world's first surgeon. He knew how to take tumors out of people's bodies. He was the first person to diagnose someone with cancer. He was the first person to know that honey is an antibacterial, and so a lot of corpses, a part of their mummification process is to soak them in a big vat of honey to get rid of all the bad bacteria and preserve the corpses for all of eternity. It's situated here in what's called a necropolis, or city of the dead. King Zoser, Djoser, Dozer has the biggest tomb here, but then we also have all these smaller tombs forming what looks like a little city, and it's got little streets and little buildings and chapels and things there so that you can go and visit. These tourists here give us a good idea of scale. It is 240 feet tall, I think, the stepped pyramid, so pretty big, about 4 times the size of the bell tower out in the quad. And it is a dirt core faced with brick, and then after that they have a sheathing of limestone on the outside, which would be a very gleaming white sort of stone. That has not survived, but it would have been quite an impressive sight back in the day. This is the layout where the tomb is underneath. You can see that burial chamber underneath, just like in a mastaba. And then here is an alternate view of it as it is situated in the necropolis, the burial complex. Still somewhat reminiscent of the ziggurat that we saw, but remember, this is a tomb and the ziggurat is a temple. Why so big? Why does it have to be so massive? Couple of reasons. The pharaoh's ego is probably number one. I'm the pharaoh. I'm the most important. Mine needs to be so much bigger and more impressive than everyone else's. So there's that. There's also added layers of protection. The thicker the walls are, the more the mummy will be protected in the afterlife, or before the afterlife. And then it's also kind of a status symbol. The bigger your tomb, the more important you are, the more impressive you'll be. And so that's the motivation. But the downside to that is when you have these giant ass tombs, they kind of stick out in the desert like big rob me signs Say, here's where all the treasure is. It's in the biggest building. That's the one you want to rob first. Then you can check out the little smaller buildings if you have time on the way out. And so this one, just like all of the other pyramids, was robbed in antiquity. Although I do think one piece of King Zoser survived from his death. I think he had a foot that's left. It still may be around. There's another view. There's what it would have looked like back in the day with the gleaming white limestone sheathing. On some of our pyramids, especially the Great Pyramids that we'll see later, there was also a layer of gold on the top that reinforced the importance of the deceased. Within, of course, nothing's more tempting than a big piece of gold just laying out in the desert sun, waiting for someone to sneak up at night and hack off little pieces of it until it's gone. And that's what happened. There's a layout of the necropolis, and you can see there are various temples and chapels and tombs all sort of strewn about there. The stepped pyramid went through two different phases. It began, or three actually. So it started out as a mastaba, and then we decided to make it a bigger mastaba. And then we decided that wasn't quite big enough, and so they built a second mastaba around this first set, so like a shell that would kind of embrace it, and it got progressively bigger, like Russian nesting dolls, and it got bigger and better and inspirational. There's King Djoser, in case you were curious what he looked like, but he probably did not look anything like this, because we don't have the idea of individualistic portraiture for each of these pharaohs. They are all of a type. They must all prescribe to the formula, so they all look the same. It's only the lesser people, the viziers, the assistants, the princes, then we can get a little more individualistic, but we still have to kind of adhere to the formula to a point. There's another view. And then here is Imhotep and some of his different titles that he had. He was the architect of the stepped pyramid, the chancellor to King Djoser, high priest of Ra at Heliopolis, a scribe, an author, an engineer, a surgeon. Later he became a god. They deified him and made him the god of medicine because of all of his medical discoveries. First Renaissance man before there was even a Renaissance. And then this is my lame pun for the day. Can I rap with you for a second about my awesomeness? Because it's a mummy, and it's... in the necropolis, we find also some new attempts at construction. Most everything that was constructed up to this point in Mesopotamia was done on a post and lintel system, just like Stonehenge. You have upright stones and then stones that lay across the top. Well, now we're starting to play around with some new ideas. The idea of the column, a supporting post that then has not just a lintel but an entire roof above it. This is one of the earliest sort of incarnations of the column. It's still attached to the wall, which makes it an engaged column. The Egyptians aren't quite sure of the stability of a stone stick to hold up a roof, so they keep it attached to the wall, which is okay. It kind of enlivens the wall and makes it prettier and so forth. These early columns are based on plant forms. The capitals are usually local fauna, or local flora rather, palm trees, lotus blossoms, lotus buds, ferns, that sort of thing, anything that grows locally. And then the shaft of the columns have little ridges in them sometimes, which are meant to emulate bundles of papyrus, which were used for support in the homes of the Egyptian blue-collar folks. So this is a stone version of a bundle of papyrus, and then they pack in the space between them with mud, but now it's stone because we're starting to try to push the envelope a little bit. Here are some engaged columns that are attached to the end of the wall instead of the middle of the wall. And you can see some of those flutes on the outside, some of those ridges that are meant to emulate those bundles of papyrus reeds. There's a bundle of papyrus reeds, so you can see what I'm talking about. So eventually, they do create the freestanding column, but you can see that they're still not quite sure of its supportive ability. How many columns does it take to hold up a roof? Not as many as they use here. So they overcompensate drastically at first. This could have easily been held up by 6 columns, but instead we get 3 dozen columns. Eventually we'll figure out how many it takes and the physics and so forth. But early on, it's all about overcompensation, but that should not surprise us. Pharaohs would be prone to overcompensation because they're pharaohs, and that's what they do. Most big leaders like that are insecure, and so they overcompensate with big giant pyramids and too many columns and you name it. Okay, so we've done the mastabas, we've done the stepped pyramid. Now we get to the big pyramids. But first, what evolved? How did those come about? Well, there are a few subsequent attempts to create pyramids between the stepped pyramid of King Djoser and the great pyramids of Giza that we know today. This is one by Pharaoh Sneferu. It's sort of kind of a pyramid. It's a stepped pyramid with longer transitions, and then he didn't really like this, and so he built a different one. You can see the angle was such that some of the brickwork began to fall off before it was even finished. So then this was the second version, the bent pyramid. Same thing happened. The angle was too steep, and so the bricks started falling off before they were even finished with it. So then they changed the angle about halfway up, giving it this little kink in the middle, hence the term the bent pyramid. And I think this is what he ended up going with because then he died. So after we get to this point, then we get to the great pyramids. We have mastered pyramids. We know what all the angles are and everything, and so we start to build them for our pharaohs. Just like these earlier ones, they're oriented to the 4 points of the compass, north, south, east, west. They are quarried from limestone from a local quarry. We didn't carry these blocks 27 miles in order to build them. We quarried the stone locally. The biggest of the 3 is not the one in the middle. Even though it looks the biggest in photographs, it's actually this one on the far right there, the Pyramid of Cheops or Khufu. Then in the center, we have the Pyramid of Khafre. It's the most intact. You can see that a little bit of its limestone facing is still there on the cap. And then we have the smaller version on the bottom, the Pyramid of Menkaure. So the tomb areas are inside these pyramids. They are right there at the edge of Cairo. Whenever we think of the pyramids, we always think of them being in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nothing. That's why I like this picture, because it's right on the edge of Cairo. There's all the apartment buildings and so forth. I had a friend who visited Cairo, and he said it was one of the filthiest cities you could think of, just garbage blowing around the pyramids and that sort of thing. Who knows? The Pyramid of Khufu originally was 481 feet tall. It was the tallest. The second one, Khafre, was 471 feet tall. A lot of the stone from the top of the Pyramid of Khufu is gone because the souvenir hunters would climb it and chop a chunk off and take it home with them. Just to give you a comparison of scale, here's the Great Pyramid of Khufu compared to the Eiffel Tower, compared to the Statue of Liberty, Big Ben, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And just for fun, I threw in the bell tower just to give you a sort of comparison. By the way, interesting fact about the bell tower in the quad, it is 66 feet 6 inches tall. 666. I don't know what it means. It was the Yannees that donated it, and it was built in 1986. I don't think they were Satan worshipers. Maybe they were. Those Nebraskan Satanists, they're pretty ruthless. So there's the view you always think of with the desert behind it and so forth. They probably took about 25 years a piece to build those, which is not that long when we think of it. They weren't built by slave labor. That's what we mostly think of, that the Pharaoh would order slaves to come together and build all these, but probably more than likely they were built by farmers. So the Nile floods about 6 months out of the year, and then you grow your crops, you harvest your crops, and then it dries up. So you've got out-of-work farmers, you've got a ready workforce with nothing better to do, and so the Pharaoh would hire them to come and build the pyramids and put them together. And they were paid. They weren't slave labor. There were slaves that worked as well, but mostly it was the out-of-work farmers who were waiting on the Nile to flood again. Paid in beer, a lot of them were. There were some records that survive how many pints of beer you got for a day's work. As far as the process of how the pyramids were built, up for debate still. No one knows for sure. Most likely that log technique that I explained to move the blocks and tackle, that kind of thing. Scaffolding, spiral scaffolding to go all the way around to put things together. Things like that. It could be done with levers and counterweights and so forth. It's not impossible. Remember, our friend Stonehenge predates the pyramids by about roughly 500 years or so. So Stonehenge was around before the pyramids were. Pyramids also the only one of the ancient wonders of the world that still survives. Everything else has all been destroyed over history. There's a view from below, looking up. About 2,300,000 giant limestone blocks with an average weight of 2.5 tons apiece. But then there are some larger stones on the interior of the pyramid that weigh as much as 30 tons apiece. I don't know how they moved those around, but they did. There's a view from the top looking down. I think there's a little radio tower on top of the tallest one now with a little light so helicopters don't fly into it. Up until the 1960s, you could climb up there, fart around, eat a snack, and drink tea. And then it was outlawed in the 60s because some poor sucker fell off and got killed. And so now it's against the law to climb the pyramids. But people still do. There was a big brouhaha a couple of years ago. Some influencer decided to climb the pyramids at night and have sex with his girlfriend and film it because he was on top of the pyramids. But then he got caught and arrested and so forth. Aspirations, right? No. So anyway, you can't climb it anymore, but you used to be able to climb it, but people would start hacking off pieces of rock and stuff and wearing it down over the centuries. There's another view, and you can see how they are situated next to the city of Cairo, just barely visible there in the distance. Some parts of them align to the constellation of Orion, which is identified with the god Osiris, the guardian of the underworld, so that makes sense. There are other little shafts and things that go all the way through the pyramid, false burial chambers, queen's chambers, and so forth to deter thieves. They were unsuccessful. All of the great pyramids were robbed in antiquity, and so none of that survived. There is still a sarcophagus, I believe, in the interior of the pyramid of Khufu, but the corpse long gone. You can still tour it. You can still go inside. They've cleaned it out, so you can go right in and climb the stairs and go visit the burial chamber and do your thing. This is what you get to see. There's a view from the inside. You can imagine how dim and claustrophobic and dark and so forth it would be on the inside. Not hot though. I think all the thickness of the stone keeps the heat out, and so the temperature inside remains relatively cool all year long. So you'd walk up these stairwells flanked by painted hieroglyphs, carved hieroglyphs in some cases. There's Khufu's tomb, his actual sarcophagus. That's all that's left. Nothing inside. Let's peek. No, nothing. Still empty. Not even a foot left in Khufu's pyramid. There's another little bit. I already told you all this stuff. 25 years to build. Built by farmers in the off season. Probably not slaves. Used to, the Nile River flowed right next to it. Nile has shifted over the centuries and it's a lot further away. But that would make sense because they would have funerary barges to escort the pharaoh's body from the palace to the pyramid, and so there would be a funerary barge which would then dock, and then you'd walk along this long levee toward the pyramid, passing by the Great Sphinx on your way. Nowadays, when you go, you can't climb it, but they'll give you a cool light show and play music and things at night, so you can see the pyramids in green and see them in red and so forth. But what about us, Mr. Waterfield? This is great and all about the pharaohs and how they were, but what about the everyday Joe? Like I said, you get a jug. You can be stuffed into a big clay pot. Sometimes they put a few little things in with you, some food, some offerings for the afterlife, but more often than not, you get nothing. Or if you couldn't afford a pot, they would just dig a little shallow grave and then fold you up and put you in it face east, which is where the sun rises, so that your soul could find Ra in the afterlife, and then that's it. So there you go. You don't get a pyramid, so quit asking. Here's the Great Sphinx, which is sort of a guardian figure for the pharaoh. That's Khafre's face on the pharaoh there, right along that viaduct that connects to the Great Pyramid associated with Khafre behind him. It's built from a natural outcropping of limestone that was then carved into the shape of the Sphinx, which is simply a lion with the head of a human. In this case, the human is the pharaoh. After the carving was done, it would be faced with limestone bricks and then painted. All of it smoothed over to create a nice homogeneous whole. The limestones of varying grades, and so this lesser grade eroded a lot more than the harder, denser grade that was used for the face, and so as a result, these lines that you see led to the theory that at one time all of Egypt was underwater, and these are watermarks of different floods, which is preposterous. Never happened. There's another view. It is about 65 feet tall, about the same height as the bell tower, about 1/6 the height of the tallest pyramid. And you can see they've restored some of the paws of the lion and its little tail. See his little lion tail around the back there? There's an alternate view. It faces east, faces the rising sun, and serves as a protector sort of figure, not unlike the Lamassu of Mesopotamia, to kind of protect the body of the Pharaoh from all enemies seen and unseen. There's a view from above with tourists perched there to have a fresca and enjoy a little snack, a little refreshment in the afternoon. And then there's a view with the Sphinx in front of the pyramid with a lamassu next to it. They're both guardians. I wouldn't be surprised if I would ask you a question about the difference between the two of them. There's not much except bull body, lion body, but they're both guardians. So, Sphinx was buried at the time Napoleon was there. This is at the turn of the 19th century, about 1899 or so. It was buried up to its neck. So all we had was the head and the body, and then eventually the British began the excavation of the body of the Sphinx. And while they were excavating, they found a couple of things. The Sphinx used to have a little cobra headdress here. They found the cobra buried in the dirt. Also the beard. It had a little beard attached, and they found that too and decided to take that with them back to London. So if you want to see the Sphinx's beard, you got to go to London to see it now. Guy tried to drill a hole in it in 1837 to see if it was hollow, to see if there was hidden treasure chambers inside. Isn't it always about the treasure? So he drilled a hole, and then the drill got stuck about 30 feet in, and so they used some dynamite to get it back out and blew off the whole back part of the Sphinx there. And then they eventually went back and cleared out the hole, and there's nothing. There's nothing inside it. It's solid as a... you can see little tiny traces of blue and yellow in the headdress here that have survived down over the years, but that gives you some sense of what it would have been like. A new theory that has just emerged is that possibly it was originally an entire jackal that was dedicated to Anubis, and then it was later recarved to be King Amenemhet II, and then carved a third time to become Khafre. Why and where did this come from, this theory? Some guy did some translations, and the Sphinx used to sit in the middle of a little moat, and the moat was called the Lake of the Jackal, or Jackal Lake. And Anubis was a jackal, and so from that he says, well, this could have been Anubis at one. Probably not. Just made up theories. So when you go to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, which they've got a fantastic new museum they just finished building, billions of dollars put into it. Fantastic piece of architecture. You can go see the cobra headdress, and then when you go to the British Museum, you can see King Tut's beard. Few other types of sculptures. We have kings and queens. We still apply the pharaonic formula. The left leg advances, fists are clenched because you're holding weapons, you're ready to fight. The male is very angular compared to the female, who is a little curvier, so there's starting to be a difference in the portrayal of males and females. We didn't get a lot of that in Mesopotamia. There's also no open space because open space represents weakness, and we don't want to communicate any sort of weakness on behalf of the pharaoh. Last thing I would point out is not only is she a little more gently curved than the male counterpart, there is the suggestion of breasts and also a pubic area. So we're already referencing not just femininity, but motherhood and fertility and that sort of thing. She has the same sort of pose, but she's submissive almost. They're the same height. He's ready for action, and she just sort of supports him. So she's got her arm wrapped around him, kind of paying tribute. Now, we don't even know for sure that that's his wife. We always assumed it was, but her identity is still up for debate. Sometimes the pharaoh is shown with his mother. Sometimes the pharaoh is shown with his protector goddess. It could be Isis. It could be Ma'at. We don't know, but most people just assume. The face of Menkaure that we just saw, this is not meant to be a portrait of the king and a portrait of the queen. It's more about the idea of the king, and so that's why they all look the same. They all have the same sort of facial characteristics and so forth. And if we look right behind Khafre on his back, that's Horus. Horus has got his back. He's protecting him from enemies behind him that he might not see. There's another view. Still very angular, still developing the idea of masculine versus feminine representation with regard to the female form or human form. That will continue to develop and get more and more precise. Here's a good example of that, masculine versus feminine. This is Prince Rahotep and his wife Nofret. Legend says she never had any worries at all about anything because no fret. She's not fretting. Come on, I'm trying to work over here. I'm trying to give you people entertainment gold. What do you notice? What do you notice about them? What's the first difference you see? She is more clothed. Anything else?
She's paler.
She is pale. Both of those things are traits of women of good breeding. The female form is meant to be covered because she exists only for the pleasure of her husband, and she is pale because she doesn't have to do any manual labor. She is a noble woman, so she stays inside all the time. If you were female and had a tan back then, you were low class, because that meant you had to go outside and hack down papyrus or something like that to feed your family. But the man could do it because men are warriors and hunters, and they've got to be outside doing things, so they get to be nice and tan. There's a closer view of Princess Nofret, pale skin, shell inlay for the eyes to make her look more alive. And then there is the prince with a nice little mustache. I always thought he looked a little like Lionel Richie, but who can say? And then we've got hieroglyphs behind them telling their different attributes. Now, if you were not a pharaoh, then you could be shown a little more naturalistically, as is the case with this scribe, whose name is possibly K. Now, scribe just sat around and wrote notes all day, so he's got a nice little pot belly, and he's got some saggy man boobs, and he's got a little extra weight on him. He's got a receding hairline. He's old. All those things you can record because he's not a pharaoh, so we can show him how he actually looked. He's very attentive too. He doesn't have that aloof, passive face. He's listening. What is it, Pharaoh? You got a recipe for some beer? Your guy Kay is here. I'm ready to take it all down for you. This is an inscription about the life of the scribe that survived down to it. Become a scribe so that your limbs will remain smooth and your hands soft, and you can become a man of great standing, wearing a white robe whom the courtiers will greet. Of course, who wouldn't want to be a scribe with a description like that? So he doesn't have the pharaonic pose. This is a very naturalistic pose. He's sitting crisscross applesauce taking notes, just like a scribe would. And we see that with other non-royals. This is another flabby noble who had nothing better to do than sit around in the palace all day. And so he also needs some Ozempic and a high-protein diet in order to get rid of a little bit of that flab. And then here's one more, a vizier. He's got weight, he's got a bald head, his face looks like it could very well be a portrait, and indeed it just might be. But his body is a reflection of his somewhat relaxed lifestyle. He's more sedentary than others of his time. This is a new sort of image that arises. We have the full-length portrait of our pharaohs, but then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we get the portrait bust. which is from the head down to the middle of the abdomen, and that's it. Why? Why did they start making these? We don't know. It could have been an expense thing. It's cheaper because you don't use as much material, but it's hard to say. He would have had a beard. The beard's been broken off. But look at the attention to detail in the face. We get, he's an older guy. He's got a receding hairline. He's got bags under his eyes. We show him as he actually looked. So that's kind of interesting. And then we see similar things in tomb murals as well. Here is Prince T watching a hippopotamus hunt in the afterlife. This is a tomb mural, so we show the afterlife in its kind of ideal form. So not only would you hunt like you do in this life, but there's going to be a profusion of things to hunt. The Nile is positively crammed full of hippopotamuses and fish and so forth. But if you want to do a little bird hunting, the trees are packed with birds. The prince has the very stiff and formal pharaonic form. He's not even really participating in the hunt. He has slaves do that for him. So he's very rigid and formal in his pose. But the hunters, look at all that action, all that movement. They're moving like people actually move. So this tells us that the Egyptians could render things naturalistically if they wanted to, but more often than not, they are muzzled by the pharaonic formula and having to portray the pharaoh a certain way. But when we get the chance to be fun and naturalistic and energetic, we do. Down to all those poor hippopotamuses getting stabbed to death. We see it in a few other scenes of everyday life. Slaves herding cattle, more slaves fording cattle across a river, and you can see all the water, carved water there. This slave has a little calf on his back, and his mom is sort of upset about it, and so she's moving, hey, be careful with my kid. Just trying to carry him across the river so he doesn't drown. Again, this is observation. They're observing all these, really kind of flattens everything out, but if you take it off, then it looks more naturalistic. And then as far as tombs go, after the pyramids, they really didn't make any more. They were expensive and they got robbed. They're dead. This is a portrait that survived. This is Sesitrices III, who had a very troubled reign. And so he's got this furrowed brow. He's troubled. He's not enjoying his rule. We get a little bit of facial expression that reflects the way that his rule went down. You can see some columns, freestanding columns, but are they really doing anything? No, they're just decorative at this point, as are these. How do you know they're decorative, Mr. Verva? Well, this isn't really holding up anything, so quit arguing with me about it. But you can see we're still experimenting with things, trying out new things, seeing what works and what doesn't. And then next time, we'll see how we continue that idea. All right, I finished 5 minutes early. You're welcome.